Hello there, welcome. I'm going to be going over how to get started dialing tones in Bias Effects and dialing tones in general, because Bias Effects is basically a digital representation of really what you can do in person. Don't worry about me being cut off here or whatever, it's more about what's happening on my computer screen, and I think that's more important than kind of what I look like or kind of the guitar I'm using or what I'm playing. So I'm using a Telecaster, okay, just to kind of retain the original flavor here of what the original player is playing, and it's very important to kind of, you don't need to use the same exact guitar, but it does help a lot. It's easily like already like 70% of the sound with whatever amp you're using just because of the guitar, okay, and from there it's just shaping everything. So the guitar is a big factor, and definitely something you can work with, but it's not the deciding factor. And I'll show you something else you can do in the event that you don't have a Telecaster. You can use EQing and a few other things to kind of get closer to that sound. Okay, so I'm going to be using my Telecaster today. It's missing the high E string. It just broke yesterday, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to try and play either way. Let's listen from the beginning, this guitar part happening here by the YouTuber Yewon, which sounds awesome. So there's a few things going on that we got to clear up before we even get started in this. This performance is already pre-recorded, meaning he probably recorded this in Logic or whatever DAW and did all the guitar parts. Could have been done in one take, could have been done in multiple, I don't know. But it definitely sounds like it's being played on a single coil type guitar. And the Telecaster makes sense. Now, the thing that's important is that there are neck position changes here, or neck pickup changes, or pickup selection changes going on, as well as some things being turned on or turned off with effects in that regard. So that means if you want to get really the whole entire spectrum of sound, we kind of need something that's versatile enough that will work for the entire cover if you were to do this in one take. And this is probably done in one take, but there are definitely things being turned on and off that, you know, retain. So, for example, like right here, listen to how much gain there is. And then all of a sudden it's a cleaner sound. Okay, so we got to be real here and understand what our limitations are. So we kind of want something that gives us a good amount of gain, but maybe something that when we lower the volume, we can get a cleaner tone. And it might not be crystalline clean, but it'll be at least closer in that way. So let's go over to Bias Effects, and this is already an instance I have open here. So this is a Marty's lead, which anyone can download through Bias Effects. And this is what that sounds like. So forgive me if it's kind of not as loud. Here it is. Definitely a lot of gain going on. And you have to look at the amps that are being used here, which is basically like a 5150 and a frickin' diesel, okay? And they sound terrific. And I love using this patch. This is kind of one of my favorite default patches, as well as something like this. I love to use this as well. Especially with single coils, something about it. So anyway, we don't want to start with that, okay? So let's go to default clean. Just to have a very easy sort of thing to work with. Let's turn off or take away all these other effects. We don't need anything right now. And now we're left with a completely clean signal chain aside from the amp. Now the amp, I'm using Bias Effects 1, by the way. If you're using Bias FX 2, it'll be very similar, but the amps will, I think, sound better. Okay, so let's start with the amp. We can move over and check out what amps we have to work with here. Now at the very bottom you see Bias Amp 2. I do have Bias Amp 2 installed, but in this case, just to keep it simple, let's just choose a Bias FX amp and work with those. And even with those, you can get an awesome guitar tone. There's a couple of ways to go about this. You either can go low gain with pedals and you can retain a lot of the clean sound. You can go crunch and then maybe add one boost pedal, or you can go high gain and maybe use like no pedals at all. And each one will have its pluses or minuses. There's no real wrong or right way to do it. It's really just up to you. Okay, so that's my first disclaimer here. Well, second disclaimer aside from what's going on with the video. So now let's go into let's actually do clean. Let's do for sure clean. And I'm really leaning towards a couple of amps. The tweed I think would be a little too dark. The Silvertone might work. That sounds way too clean to me. I want to go blackface. And I'm going to turn the master all the way up, straight up. Now the reason for that is because listen to this versus this. It's still pretty freaking clean, and if I'm going to be using some sort of drive pedals in front of this, I might as well just crank the master right off the bat. If you crank the gain, here's what happens. It's already kind of like clean boosted, and I don't like that. I kind of want to keep it clean but loud, so I want to keep this probably around 8 or so. Kind of where it was, and you can tell with single coils it sounds really good, works good. The bass I'm going to turn down a bit because it sounds like there's not that much bass going on. Mids are fine to me and treble is fine to me, and the presence I might turn up a little bit, maybe around 5 or so, just to kind of start off with. And then we can go over here to cab, and if you go to cab, you have even more options where you can control what microphones you're using, where they're placed, what cabinets you're actually using. Let's just start with the microphone. I like to put it usually right here on the edge of the dust cap. And so this center part you can see here on the speaker, that's called the dust cap. And right on the edge of that is usually this kind of like Goldilocks region where if you put it right in the middle, this is what that sounds like. More to the edge here. And then further to the edge. Then the far edge here. So you can tell even with this amp, as you move the microphone closer to the edge of the speaker, it's kind of not as crystal and clear. It's a little bit more muffled. And I don't like to have it dead in the middle because once you add in distortion and overdrives, which are already pushing treble and mid frequencies, it gets a little too ice picky. So I keep it right here on the edge. And then the other thing, of course, is you can change microphones, which we're not going to do. And then what you can do is also adjust how close the microphone is to the speaker itself. So if you have it all the way up here, it's right up against the speaker grill. Move it back a little bit. Back further still. Back more. So as you kind of move back, it becomes a little bit more airy, that kind of thing. And in this case, I'm going to keep it right, not all the way close to the grill, probably around here, I think. I think that's fine. So kind of where it already was is fine with me in terms of the distance. Now, let's start getting this distortion level. There's a couple of ways you can go around this. I'm going to go for a drive pedal, and you could go for a tube screamer type sound here, but I find a tube screamer to be a kind of dark sounding in this kind of respect. So what I like to use is the Klon drive here. It pushes mids better, and it retains this kind of clarity, which the tube screamer in the software doesn't really do for me. So now, if I turn it off, here's what this sounds like. With it on, So I like to have this output up and the gain turned down a bit. And that should do something like this. And that's with the volume all the way up. And if I turn it down a little bit, I kind of get a cleaner tone. It's definitely broken up, but it retains that kind of I don't know, the texture, I guess you could say, of the gain. So I'd like to use that a lot more. Lastly, for the gain structure, what I also like to do, and this is up to you, you don't have to do this, is using a booster in the front of that. So it's like stacking multiple gains. And the reason for that is because, let's listen to this one more time. There's definitely a good amount of gain going on there. And if I had a pedal board in front of me, I could really control everything. Versus here, if I were to do one take, I wouldn't really be able to do that unless I go into Logic and, you know, control, like, oh, this pedal turn on at this moment, and this pedal turn off, which you can do. You don't have to have like a pedal board or a MIDI controller to do that. You can actually do it within your DAW and control when things turn on, when things turn off. So that's the other alternative. But if I were to do this just as a single kind of thing, I would probably do something like this for sure, where I have the booster in the front, and so that way when I turn down the volume, kind of just retain some of that, versus right, or whatever. And then when I actually turn up the volume all the way up, going to the bridge pickup, right, and if you wanted more gain from that, I would use the boost pedal and turn up the gain. So then if I do that again, or whatever, you can work with it that way. In this case, I probably would keep the gain, somewhere around here, and work with that, and maybe manipulate this a little bit, turn the gain up here a little bit, and work with that. So that's the core of my sound already, and there seems to be also some reverb going on, so I can go over here, and at the very, very bottom, so everything is kind of laid out in order. As you can see here, gate, compressor, boost, drive, EQ, modulation, delay, and reverb. Now, EQ, I like to use in the effects loop, and I'll show you why. But what I am going to do is add in this digital reverb at the very end. And that sounds like this when it's on, just default. Sounds like there's a lot going on there. And I want it to be a darker reverb, and I want it to be shorter for sure. And I'll use the Hall reverb. So now if I play, this is basically, 90% of the tone, I think. And then when it goes into that section, you can turn this off and it'll be or whatever's going on there. So you can tell this is already kind of a great baseline to start off with and really dial in the rest. Now, last thing is, what if I'm using a different, well, actually before the last thing, let's do stereo. Now, stereo is awesome because you can get a lot of this high-end flavor and then this low-end blended together. So let's do that. So here's what the 1 amp sounds like by itself. And let me turn off all the gain pedals so that way we get an idea of what it sounds like. And here's pan to the left. And here is, I'm going to turn it up a little bit. Here's the black face on the right. I'm going to turn it up to like this. And actually, I'm going to use a different amp on the right. So this is another cool feature that you can do, is you can blend different amps. Let's say I really like the sound of the Supersonic. It's kind of more of a low-end sound. So now if I go over here, so channel 1 is the left, channel 1 and 2 is both, channel 2 is my other amp, the right. So it's kind of already a darker sound. I'm going to turn up the volume a little bit here, the level, just to kind of keep it even. And let's mess with the cabinet a little bit. Let's make it a little darker. Just like that. So now, when I blend the two, this is what that sounds like. It's definitely going to sound fuller, and I think... Versus if I just have one here, like this, and then just use this. Right, so there's a significant difference there on using one amp versus using both. So I'm going to keep this one pan left, keep this one pan right, and I could, if I want to, kind of manipulate the delay of the amp. That to me will easily sound better. And the reason for that is because you have two amps pushing air and filling in frequencies in a different way. One is retaining some of more of these mids and high end, and the other amp is kind of giving you that low end push again, which is why I purposely chose the black face, which is giving me the high end, and the Supersonic is kind of almost like a Marshall-y kind of plexi sound, really, without as much gain. And so I like that. It retains a lot of that character, and it works really well. And then the very, very last thing that you can do, if you really, really want to, is using EQ. And EQ I put right after the amps and right before any sort of delay or reverb. And I put it in the effects loop. So this part to the right of the amp, over here is the effects loop. This part is the front of the amp, over here on the far left. And so on the EQ, let's say, maybe I'm using humbuckers and I want to have a kind of more crystalline, or not crystalline, but definitely something similar to a single coil type sound. I can use EQ shaping here to get there. Or let's say, maybe I want something that sounds more like a humbucker. Let's try and do that. So here's what this sounds like with no EQ going on. And let's try to shape it a little bit more like, more like a humbucker. Let's take some of this high cut, lower it down. Let's drop 4K a little bit. Drop 8 and drop 16 for sure. And this is what that sounds like already. With it off, right, it's already getting there. And then if I really want to, I could push 250 up just a little bit. Probably something like that. So it's getting there, and if I use the tone knob, drop it down a little bit, I've got something that sounds pretty close to a humbucker. And if I turn it off, do the same thing. All of a sudden, with EQ shaping, you can turn something that's a single coil type guitar into something more like a humbucker, Or if you really want to, you can turn humbuckers to sound a little bit more like single coils, and then you can shift the level and how much output those pickups are giving you through just shaping through EQ. Okay, so that's the absolute last thing I'm going to give you. It's not going to sound 100%, but you can definitely experiment and follow what I did. Start with the amp, then do your gain, and then do everything else. That's kind of how I approach everything. You want to just kind of experiment, see what will work. Again, with cabinets, the closer you are to the middle, the brighter it will sound, versus off to the edge, it's going to sound more darker, not as detailed or clear. Experiment with different drive pedals, right? So you have a whole host of drive pedals here. You don't have to do what I did. You could definitely try something else and see if it works any better, or maybe it's worse, or maybe you just use multiple boost pedals here to get you there, and maybe you don't use a boost pedal at all, But I found that just like as if I had a pedal board, I like to have multiples of some things, just because it gives me kind of this cool variation I can use here. So if I kind of play now, let me turn the EQ off. Like that to me sounds pretty good. Sounds cool. I like it. Let me know if you have any questions or if you need some advice in anything else. I've used Bias Effects now for over a year, I think. Yeah, I think it was right before, probably a month or two before Bias Effects 2 came out. I bought Bias Effects 1. So here you go. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good one.